In 1976, producers and members of the Second City Theatre's Toronto offshoot launched a new sketch comedy show on Canadian television which used the framing device of the show being a broadcast from a fictional television station called SCTV, which naturally stood for Second City Television. SCTV would prove to be a runaway hit and would run from 1976 to 1984 on various Canadian and American networks, even managing to run on NBC from 1981 to 1983. The cast members of SCTV would soon go on to become some of the most popular comedy stars of the 80s and 90s, including John Candy, Eugene Levy, Rick Moranis, Martin Short, Catherine O'Hara, Dave Thomas, Andrea Martin, and Joe Flaherty. The careers of each of these comedians skyrocketed following their years on SCTV, and all of them could soon be found either headlining or starring in supporting roles in movies and other TV projects. And then a strange confluence of events happened. In an early video on my other channel, I talked about the Fox network's attempts to get a new Get Smart TV series on the air, prompted by reruns of the original series being aired on Nick at Night. And it would seem in the late 80s, something similar happened with SCTV. Nick at Night started airing the 30-minute syndicated version of SCTV on September 10th, 1988, and by a strange cosmic coincidence, earlier that same day, NBC had premiered a brand new cartoon series on its Saturday morning schedule, The Completely Mental Misadventures of Ed Grimley, starring Martin Short, reviving a character he had originally created during his time with Second City Toronto. The show was another one-season wonder, only lasting 13 episodes, but also featuring the voices of other SCTV performers, most notably Joe Flaherty as Count Floyd, reprising the role of another SCTV character, as well as Catherine O'Hara and Andrea Martin. Now, I don't know for certain if the SCTV reruns coupled with the Ed Grimley cartoon led to what came next, but they certainly seem to have raised the profile of the SCTV cast with younger viewers. It certainly did with me. In any event, 1989 saw NBC air the most successful of the three cartoon series that featured SCTV alumni. Camp Candy, starring John Candy, ran until 1992 for a total of 3 seasons and 26 episodes. And in 1990, NBC completed the SCTV cartoon trifecta by adding a show starring SCTV's second most popular alumnus after John Candy, Rick Moranis. Rick Moranis in Gravedale High, usually just shortened to Gravedale High these days, also only lasted 1 season of 13 episodes, but it is unique in being one of the earliest known cartoons to feature the monster school trope that would become a lot more ubiquitous in later years. Moranis plays Max Schneider, the only human teacher at the titular Gravedale High, a high school for monsters in a world where monsters and human coexist, but are definitely separated, which becomes a plot element in some episodes. High school is a fairly fertile ground for a lot of TV shows, especially American ones, because it's largely one of the few universal experiences most people have. And from a story standpoint, it gives a reason for a set of wildly disparate characters to be forced to interact with each other. Schneider is the teacher of what we're told in a couple of different episodes is a class of misfits and troublemakers, which, when you watch the show, seems like something you would think come up more often than it actually does. This is especially confusing when you look at the kids in the class. Some of these characters you can see as being problem students due to the usual archetypical 80s cartoon shorthand. Vampire greaser Vinnie Stoker, sarcastic rebellious Gorgon Doozer, class clown Sid the Invisible Kid, slacking surfer Gil Waterman, and troublemaker Frankentyke, who comes off as the most modern of these archetypes because he's clearly based on Bart Simpson, whose own popularity was skyrocketing at the beginning of the rise of The Simpsons as a pop culture force. But then you look at the other characters and wonder why they're considered troublemakers. Werewolf Reggie Moonshroud is the obligatory science-obsessed nerd. J.P. Ghastly III, who I think is just meant to be a generic ghoul of some sort, only has one real character trait outside of being also the obligatory Peter Lorre impression. He's rich, and that's pretty much it. Then there's shopaholic zombie girl Blanche, who pretty much seems to have no real desires outside of shopping and marrying the richest monster in the world. You might be able to make a case for Mummy Cleo being a troublemaker, which, by the way, is not the character's full name, and I'm not going to repeat it here because it's a bad pun, and really has not aged well in the last 30 years. But I'm sure you can figure it out for yourself. Anyway, Cleo does have a temper and a tendency to get physical when she gets mad, but those are also moments that are few and far between. Whatever the reason, it's generally implied that Schneider is the only teacher willing to take this class on as students, which is why he got the job. And he's actually pretty good at wrangling these kids. Where a lot of cartoons of the era would probably write Schneider as a high-strung and probably secretly terrified of his students and fellow teachers, instead he comes off as the tough but fair kind of teacher. He's tolerant of a lot of nonsense, but doesn't hesitate to yank on the leash when he needs to. He can also match the kids in terms of sarcasm and snark. These all seem to be traits based on Moranis' own natural personality as opposed to the more nebbishy characters he was known for playing at the time, like Louis Tully or Seymour Krelborn. As the series goes on, Schneider's students come to actually like him, to the point that in one episode where a misunderstanding causes the kids to think Schneider has gotten a job at a prestigious prep school, they revert back to their worst selves, which turns the whole thing into a self-fulfilling prophecy, because their attitudes cause Schneider to leave Gravedale High and take the prep school job. And, of course, after a series of outright sadistic and horrible substitute teachers, the class works to convince Schneider to come back, where the whole thing is revealed as a big misunderstanding, as the letter the kids found was actually a delayed response to a job application he had put in long before he got the job at Gravedale. Which, honestly, is the main flaw with the series as a whole. The plots are pedestrian, relying on fairly predictable storylines, such as Doozer being made the editor-in-chief of the school paper and turning it into a tabloid, printing outright lies and half-truths, until everybody gets fed up with her and starts printing made-up stories about her instead. Or, due to an accident, Vinny winds up with a fear of heights right at a time when he has to face off against a member of the football team in a flying contest. Or a fairly typical for the times stay-in-school story where Gil contemplates dropping out to become a professional surfer, until his mentor Kahuna Bob reveals that he never finished school and as a result didn't really understand his contracts with his sponsors and managers and wound up getting screwed out of all of his money and living in a shack on the beach. In short, most of these are the same kind of stories you'd see in other high school set cartoons of the 70s and 80s. Balancing that out, however, is the voice acting and the animation. Other videos about the show have talked about some of the surprising names that were part of the cast. Aside from Rick Moranis, there was also Jonathan Winters, Sherry Belafonte, Eileen Brennan, and Jackie Earle Haley. Yeah, the actor for this guy,
primo conditions, little dude. Let's hit the waves,
is the same actor for this guy.
I'm not locked in here with you.
You're locked in here with me!
But the animation is probably the biggest standout. All the character designs are fun and interesting, with Schneider being just a little bit out of place, even among the other human characters, since he also has to be a caricature of Rick Moranis that can fit into a cartoon universe. But just about every scene has some interesting animation to it, even if in typical late 80s Hanna-Barbera fashion, sometimes the sound effects don't quite line up to the action on screen.
Thank you so much!
It's also an interesting time capsule of what would be considered acceptable artwork on Saturday mornings on the broadcast networks, especially in episodes where the characters go to the beach or otherwise need to be in swimsuits, because things can get a little risque. Oh yeah, look at that sexy beast. As mentioned, Gravedale High was another one-season wonder, lasting only 13 episodes. It's never had a DVD release, probably due to likeness rights for Rick Moranis being involved, so copies of the episodes that have surfaced online are mostly taken from VHS recordings that somebody did when they were kids, which are fascinating time capsules in their own right.
Yo, what's up? This is Will Smith, but my friends call me the Fresh Prince. But now that I'm in my new crib, you can call me His Royal Freshness, right? So yo, watch The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, Monday on NBC.
And even finding the whole series is a challenge. I was only able to find 11 out of the 13 episodes on YouTube for this video, spread across 3 different channels, although I know all the episodes have been available in the past. I discovered there's even a fairly decent fan presence for the show on Tumblr, which surprised me to be honest, given how short-lived the show was. If you like monsters and comedy with some excellent animation and voice work and can deal with some predictable plotting, you'll probably enjoy Gravedale High. Do some digging of your own and check this one out. It Came From Saturday Morning continues next week as we jump across the pond, which is probably a more appropriate metaphor than you realize just yet.
These kids are great.